Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, and today I'm going to be doing a spoiler-free review of J. Bree's new epic fantasy series, The Mortal Fates, particularly the first book, The Crown of Oaths and Curses. So before we get any further into the review, I need to preface this by saying that before this first book, you need to read two novellas, one being The Scepter and the second being The Sword. Both are around 100 pages, and they are both introductory novellas to set up the world and also our main characters, but I will talk about that shortly here in a moment. So excuse me for looking down and whatnot, but I do have notes here that I made about the book because it's a lot harder for me to talk about things spoiler-free as opposed to spoiler-filled. And also, it's been 2 days since I finished reading this, so some things may be a little fuzzy because I flew through this so quick. It's a chunker, but I finished this in 3 days, I believe. But yeah, so let's get into it. So the first novella, The Scepter, follows Rook, and she is a witch in this world who lives with her family, and they're all slaughtered except her and her older brother Pimba. And we're not entirely sure why they were slaughtered, but we do know who coordinated the attack, and it was from an individual called the High Witch, who is like this dictator in the witch world, and he's taking witches and turning them into an evil being. With this evil army of witches, they kind of turned the High Fae into their enemies. So that's basically what the first novella kind of sets out. Rook also, there's fates in this world, and she gets her fate that ties her to the Savage Prince of the High Fae. And we will meet him in the second novella, The Sword. But I really enjoyed this first novella. I think it set the world up very well. And I do think Rook is a very fascinating character because she starts out a little naive, but then she's thrown into reality very quickly. And she's forced to grow up and make these very hard decisions. And by the end of the novella, she does make a big decision that does alter things. And then we pick up with her in the beginning of the first book. All right, so then we have the second novella called The Sword, which follows our love interest and our male main character, Soren, who is the Savage Prince of the High Fae. His story kind of is similar to Rook in that his journey really starts when his parents are murdered. And they were also murdered by the witches from the High Witch's army. And that sparks a huge prejudice against witches in general. He doesn't know that his mate is also a witch. We don't know that until the beginning, and he doesn't know that until the beginning of the first book. But in his novella, we set him up to be a very vengeful person, but also he cares about his land and he cares about the people around him. And we meet his cohorts. We have his cousin Arlie, who is mated to his best friend Rowan, and then we have his two cousins Titan and Taran, and they're twin brothers. They're a very close-knit family. They look after each other. Very inner circle-like from ACOTAR. I really like their dynamic. Your feelings will change about them in book 1 for sure, but I will talk about that when we get there. But something I also didn't note was that Soren and Rook have a telepathic connection because they are mates. And so they know each other exists. They talk to each other in their minds before. But when Rook decides to go on her journey, she cuts him off, and then he doesn't hear from her. And then Soren also has to deal with this political storyline where his uncle is ruling the land for him essentially until he meets the requirements of marrying his fated mate and putting a queen on the throne. And then they can end the curse that's over this land together. All right, so let's talk about the first book, The Crown of Oaths and Curses. My God. This follows Rook 200 years after the events of the scepter. And before I delve into this more, Rook also inherits the scepter that was her mother's, and it has a lot of magical powers. So I just want to go ahead and talk about that then, because that is important to her character, and I just missed it in my introduction to the scepter. But anyway, so yeah, we're following Rook 200 years after the events of the scepter. She is a very different person. She's mature, she's seen a lot of things, she's gone through a lot of trauma. So she's a very strong-willed being who decides to come back and accept her fate. And she is phenomenal. I love Rook so freaking much. She is such a strong, badass character, and she has to put up with so much bullshit in this book. And I'll talk about that here in a second, because it angers me. I have a visceral reaction to all the shit she has to put up with. It's just insane. And I love that Jay Bree gave her this quiet, intense, I don't even know what word I'm trying to look for, but she's so strong, and she's a pillar. She really is. And I love that she's so selfless. I love that she cares about everyone around her. And I love that she decided to come back on good intentions to help Soren carry out this fate. And she gets the short end of the stick, let me tell you. Because then we also have Soren. Once him and her come together, it is horrific. The treatment of her by him and the High Fae is disgusting. They are horrible to her. And this isn't enemies to lovers, but let me just tell you, this is the most enemies to lovers I have ever read. There's no romance in this book at all. That's not really a spoiler, I don't think. And I think it's important to go in, if you don't know anything about this series, it's important to go into this book knowing that there is no romance. But this whole book is setting up the enemies part to the enemies to lovers dynamic, and she does such a good job, because you know that by the time we get to book 2 and the way this book ends and how phenomenal Rook is, you know book 2 is going to have delicious groveling from Soren, and I can't freaking wait. I have such strong feelings about the way they treated her in this book, and once you read it, you'll know what I'm talking about. And it's horrible, but again, and the reviews they talk about this as well, that she set up the enemies part too well. I don't think it was too much. It's very refreshing for me to read a fantasy romance series that's enemies to lovers, where we're spending so much time developing the enemies part, because that just makes the lovers part, whenever it comes, so satisfying, and it's going to be so worth it, because we saw how much they struggled in the beginning. And I'm super excited to see that play out, because it's going to be great. It really is. Soren, okay, so like I said, Rook was incredible. Everyone's going to love her. You are going to put her on your new favorite female characters list. She's incredible. I love her so much. Soren, let's talk about Soren for a second. He's awful. He's the most frustrating love interest I have ever read in my life. But the thing is Jay Bree wrote him this way on purpose. We have to have him be a horrible person, because that's just going to make his character development so worth it. It's going to make it so juicy. It's going to make it so, the payoff is just going to be epic, and I can't wait for that. And we have to put that context of their world into the story as well, because I think people really hate Soren just on principle, but you have to understand his upbringing and the way that Rook's going to have to help change everyone's mindset. And we get little nuggets of that in the book, but not nearly enough to cover for him and everyone to fully recover from their fears of the witches. So yeah, I'm very excited to see them develop more in book 2, and I just love this foundation. It was fantastic. So the side characters are very layered and they're very interesting. We have Arlie, who is his cousin, and something I didn't mention as well, I'm so bad at this, is that the witches put a curse on the High Fae, and they're not allowed to have children. So anytime a High Fae has a child, they die. So Arlie is dealing with that with her second pregnancy. The first one was not successful. And so she has to deal with a lot of prejudice because of her personal vendetta against the witches because of her babies. So she goes through a very interesting arc. And we have Rowan as well, who has to deal with the same type of things, but he comes from a more military background, so he's thinking more logistically of how Soren needs to play this whole thing out. And I liked them very much, and I think you'll really appreciate their character arcs throughout the story. And then we have Titan and Tauren. Titan I really enjoyed for parts of it. Tauren was frustrating as hell, but not as bad as Soren. But they're both very, very much alike. So you're going to have to deal with bullshit all over the place, and that's just the way it is. So this is my favorite book of the year so far, other than Fourth Wing, which is saying a lot because I loved Kingdom of the Wicked. I loved Fourth Wing, like I said. But I think this has the potential to become one of my favorite fantasy romance series. And I'm super excited that I love this so much because it was something I was very interested in for a very long time. And I'm glad I finally picked it up. And no one's talking about this book. I need everyone to go out and read this series. And this has made me very interested to read her Broken Bond series, which is very different from this. It's a reverse harem paranormal fantasy series, I believe, which is nothing like this. This is epic fantasy, so it reads completely different than something like that. So yes, I hope this made somewhat sense. If you have any critiques about this review, please let me know below so I can get better at this. But please, 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 I need people to read this book. And comment down below if you have any interest in this, and if you have read it, what you thought. I'm very excited for book 2 to come out next year. I really wish I had it in my hands right now, but alas, we have to wait a year. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you guys next time. Bye!